I was 48 when I walked into my twin sister's baby shower with 2 police officers, a civil investigator, and the kind of calm that only comes after years of being told you are imagining your own life. My name is Anna Mercer, and for most of my adult life, my sister Elise treated that name like a spare key. We are identical twins, close enough in appearance that strangers confused us even when we stood side by side, but our personalities were never alike. Because I was cautious and too willing to believe family could be repaired by one more explanation, while Elise was charming enough to make people feel chosen and skilled at finding whoever wanted to believe her latest disaster was not her fault. For years, people thought I was the difficult twin because I kept distance from her while she smiled at weddings, remembered birthdays, and told everyone she wished we could be close again, although nobody saw how many times she had borrowed parts of my life and returned them damaged. The first time happened when we were 19 and still living with our mother, after Elise used my license to enter a club because hers had been suspended for drunk driving, then cried when she was caught while our mother paid the fine and said twins should protect each other, creating the family rule that Elise caused the danger, I absorbed the consequence, and everyone called it loyalty. At 23, she used my name on a store credit account because her own credit was already ruined, and after a collection letter arrived at my apartment, she promised to pay it while my father convinced me not to report her because an identity theft charge would destroy her future, leaving me to spend 18 months repairing my credit while Elise told relatives I was controlling and obsessed with money. At 29, she took a temporary job using my college certificate because the employer wanted a qualification she did not have, then disappeared 6 months later with unpaid commissions and angry clients attached to my name, leaving me to prove I had never worked there while the family once again talked me out of involving police. By the time we were in our 40s, Elise had learned the exact limit of what I would tolerate, and I had learned to keep my passport locked, freeze my credit, and check every account as if I were monitoring a stranger. Then my father died, still convinced that identical faces meant identical loyalty, leaving a commercial building, investment accounts, and our childhood home, while his will divided most assets equally, but gave me the commercial property because I had managed it for 11 years, handled repairs, collected rent, and paid taxes during his decline. Elise knew this before the funeral because she searched his desk while he was in hospice and found an older draft of the will. She did not know he had updated it later through his attorney, but she knew enough to start preparing. At the time, I was engaged to Daniel Cross, and after 6 years together, we planned to marry once my father's estate settled, because I could not handle a wedding while managing doctors, tenants, and family arguments, while his calm, steady manner convinced me he was trustworthy. Elise had always flirted with him in the harmless way some people test whether they still have power in a room, while Daniel laughed it off and later told me I was projecting old resentment onto normal family behavior when I objected, which should have bothered me more than it did. 3 months after my father's funeral, Daniel ended our engagement by saying grief had changed me, that I had become suspicious, withdrawn, and consumed by the estate. He said he still cared, but could not live inside conflict between sisters, then moved out while I met my father's attorney. 6 weeks later, Elise posted a photograph of herself wearing the watch I had given Daniel for our 5th anniversary, and although she did not admit they were together, she did not need to, because the watch was visible precisely because she wanted it visible. When I confronted Daniel, he said their relationship had begun after ours ended, and Elise said she had resisted him for weeks because she did not want to hurt me. They both used the same phrases about unexpected connection, emotional honesty, and 2 people finding comfort during a difficult time. It sounded rehearsed because it was. I cut them both off. That should have been the end, but the inheritance kept the door open because the estate required signatures, tax filings, and cooperation. Elise delayed every document she could, disputed valuations, and accused the attorney of favoring me. She said the commercial building should be sold and divided because our father had promised everything equally. The updated will said otherwise. Then an account appeared in my name at a bank I had never used. The account received 2 transfers from the estate totaling $180,000, both authorized through electronic forms carrying my Social Security number, a copy of my license, and a signature that looked enough like mine to pass a rushed review. The money left the account within 48 hours through cashier's checks payable to a property company. I learned this only because the estate accountant asked why I had requested an early distribution that I had never requested. The bank treated me carefully at first, not because they believed me, but because the woman who opened the account looked exactly like my identification photograph and answered every security question correctly. She knew my first school, my father's middle name, the street where we lived at 12, and the hospital where I was born because those were her answers too. Identical twins make identity theft sound like a clever movie trick until you are sitting under fluorescent lights trying to prove that the woman in the security footage has your face, but is not you. The property company that received the money belonged to Daniel, who had formed it 4 months earlier. That was the moment the affair, the inheritance dispute, and years of small thefts stopped looking like separate betrayals. Elise had not simply fallen in love with my ex. She had moved into a partnership with someone who understood contracts, bank procedures, and exactly how exhausted I was after our father's death. I hired an attorney named Miriam Holt, who specialized in elder estates and financial fraud, and for the first time in my life I stopped asking the family what they thought I should do. Miriam told me to report everything, including the old incidents I had buried. I filed an identity theft report, froze every account, gave investigators handwriting samples, and submitted years of messages where Elise had admitted using my information. The bank produced security footage. A notary remembered a woman who looked like me but spoke faster and wore a strong floral perfume. A hotel camera showed Daniel waiting outside the branch while the account was opened. Elise denied everything and said I was using the police to punish her for marrying Daniel because by then they had already married. They had gone to a courthouse 2 months after revealing their relationship without telling most of the family, then held a dinner where people were expected to pretend the timeline did not matter. I did not attend. My aunt later told me Elise wore our mother's pearl earrings, the ones my father had left to me. By then, I had learned not to react immediately because Elise relied on outrage making me look unstable. I documented the earrings, the bank account, the missing estate funds, and the deed Daniel's property company had purchased with money that belonged to me. The property was a small medical office building outside the city. Daniel used the stolen distribution as a down payment, then obtained financing by listing projected rental income and claiming the funds came from his wife's inheritance. Technically, they did come from an inheritance. Just not hers. The investigation moved slowly because white-collar theft always looks calm on paper. Nobody kicked in a door. Nobody chased anyone through traffic. There were subpoenas, signature comparisons, title records, and long periods where nothing seemed to happen, while Elise posted photographs of a renovated kitchen, weekend trips, and matching rings. Then she announced that she was pregnant, which at 47 was not impossible, but was unexpected enough to change how people treated the case. Relatives who had avoided taking sides began calling me cruel for continuing legal action while my sister was expecting. My aunt said stress could harm the baby. Daniel's mother wrote that whatever mistakes had happened, an innocent child should not enter the world surrounded by police and lawsuits. I did not answer most of them, while Elise planned a large baby shower at the same country club where our father had held retirement dinners. She chose pale green decorations, hired a photographer, and created a gift registry filled with things she had once mocked other women for buying. She told relatives the event would be about healing and family, which meant she wanted me either absent and bitter or present and silent. The cream invitation was addressed to Anna and guest, and Elise wrote that the baby deserved an aunt, asking me to ignore the past for one afternoon. Adult disagreements. She had used my identity, taken my inheritance, married the man who left me, and turned the stolen money into property, but she wanted me to behave because pastel decorations were involved. I showed the invitation to Miriam, told her I had no intention of attending, and then the detective assigned to the case called. The bank records were finally complete, the handwriting expert had finished, and prosecutors were ready to move on charges related to identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. They also had evidence that Elise used my identity for more than the estate account. She had opened a line of credit, leased a luxury car, and filed a health insurance claim under my information after a private fertility procedure. That last item changed everything because the fertility clinic records were partly protected, but investigators obtained billing data showing treatment dates and payments. One payment came from Daniel's company. Another came from a man named Marcus Bell. I knew Marcus as Daniel's business partner, the person whose name appeared on several property documents, and the man who had stood beside Daniel at the courthouse wedding as a witness. He was married, had 2 children, and had spent years presenting himself as Daniel's closest friend. The detective did not tell me the baby was Marcus's. He said only that financial records suggested an undisclosed relationship and that prosecutors wanted to interview him. Miriam warned me not to turn rumor into fact. We had enough without touching paternity. Then Marcus contacted me himself and asked to meet in a parking lot behind a grocery store, which sounded ridiculous until I saw how frightened he was. He looked like a man who had slept badly for weeks, and before I could ask anything, he said Elise had told him the baby might be his. He claimed their affair began before she married Daniel and continued afterward. According to him, Elise said Daniel could not father a child because of a medical issue and knew they were using a donor. Marcus believed he was helping them privately, then later realized Daniel had no idea Marcus was involved. The story was messy and probably softened to protect Marcus, but he showed me messages where Elise discussed cycle dates, hotel meetings, and how Daniel would never question the pregnancy because he wanted a family badly enough to ignore details. Marcus had already hired his own lawyer. His wife had found the messages. He wanted to cooperate before Daniel learned from someone else. I felt no victory because by then the betrayals had stacked so high that another one did not shock me, but simply changed the shape of the collapse. The police planned to arrest Elise after the shower because the prosecutor did not want officers entering a crowded event involving children and elderly relatives. They expected to wait outside, approach her when she left, and handle everything quietly. I asked whether I could arrive before they moved. Miriam stared at me for a long time and warned that showing up could look vindictive, while I answered that it was vindictive. Then I told her I did not want to scream or expose medical details in front of everyone. I wanted to look Elise in the face while she still believed she had replaced me successfully, because for years she had relied on me disappearing whenever she crossed a line. Miriam agreed to attend, partly to stop me from doing anything reckless. The morning of the shower, I wore a dark blue dress my father had once said made me look like myself rather than Elise, which was a strange compliment at the time and a necessary one now. I carried no gift. Miriam carried a folder. 2 detectives waited in an unmarked car near the entrance. The country club lobby smelled like flowers and coffee. A sign with gold lettering welcomed guests to Elise and Daniel's baby celebration, and beneath it sat a framed photograph of them holding tiny shoes between their hands. People noticed me before Elise did, and my aunt's face went pale. Daniel's mother turned away. Several cousins looked relieved, probably because they thought my arrival meant the family had reconciled and everyone could stop choosing sides. Elise stood near the gift table in a pale green dress, one hand resting on her stomach, smiling for photographs. She looked like me with better lighting and a life she had assembled from my discarded pieces. Daniel stood beside her, wearing the watch I had given him. For a second, the room felt unreal. Not because I was confused, but because everything familiar had been moved 2 inches to the left. My sister had my face, my former fiancé, my inheritance money, my mother's earrings, and a celebration in the room where our father once toasted my work ethic. Elise saw me, smiled wider, and crossed the room with both arms open, giving everyone a performance of forgiveness before I had said a word. I did not hug her, so she stopped close enough to whisper that she was glad I had finally decided to act like family. I said I had brought people who wanted to talk to her. Her smile held for another second, then weakened when she saw Miriam. Daniel approached and asked why my lawyer was there. I told him the question would make sense in a minute, The detectives entered only after the event coordinator moved the children toward another room for games. They wore plain clothes and kept their voices low, but police do not become invisible because they speak politely. The room changed immediately. Conversation stopped. Cameras lowered. Elise's hand moved from her stomach to the edge of the gift table. When one detective asked her to step into a private office, she refused. She said if this concerned the inheritance dispute, her attorney would handle it and nobody would remove her from her own baby shower. Daniel told the officers they were upsetting a pregnant woman and threatened to call the club manager. The detective stated that Elise was under arrest, and although there was no screaming at first, it came later. She looked at me, not at the officers, and said I had finally done what I always wanted. I had made everyone believe she was the bad twin. I told her she had used my name to steal money. She said it was family money. I said our father's will disagreed. Daniel started asking what charges they meant, which was the first sign that Elise had not told him everything. When the detective mentioned the fraudulent account and his property company, Daniel's face changed from anger to calculation. He looked at Elise the same way he used to look at a contract when he suspected a missing clause. Miriam handed his attorney's contact information to one officer and advised Daniel not to speak. Then Marcus arrived, even though he was not supposed to come into the shower. His lawyer had arranged for him to meet investigators nearby, but his wife had apparently told him she would expose everything herself if he kept protecting Elise, so he entered through the lobby, looking sick and determined. Daniel saw him and asked why he was there. Marcus said he needed to tell the truth before someone else did. That sentence did what the police had not. It broke the room. Elise told Marcus to leave. Daniel asked him again why he was there. Marcus looked at Elise's stomach, then at Daniel, and said there was a possibility the baby was his. Nobody moved, and I have replayed that moment more than the arrest, because it was the first time Elise had no prepared expression. She did not cry, deny, or redirect. She simply looked empty, as though every version of the story she might use had arrived too late. Daniel laughed once, not because it was funny, but because his mind rejected the information. Then he asked Marcus whether this was some attempt to reduce his own legal exposure. Marcus showed him printed messages. Elise lunged toward the papers, and one officer stepped between them. The photographer had stopped taking pictures, but several guests had phones out, and when Miriam told people to put them away, some listened while others did not. Daniel read only the first page before sitting down. He asked Elise whether she had used him to pay for fertility treatment while seeing Marcus. She said the situation was complicated. That was the same phrase Daniel had used when leaving me. I almost smiled, then hated myself for wanting to. The officers took Elise through a side exit. They did not handcuff her in front of everyone until she tried to pull away near the hallway, and even then they kept her hands in front because of the pregnancy. She turned back once and shouted that the stress would be on me if anything happened to the baby. That sentence followed me home, while the shower ended without cake. Guests left carrying favors nobody wanted. Daniel stayed with his mother and attorney. Marcus left separately. I stood beside a table stacked with unopened gifts while staff quietly removed champagne glasses. My aunt asked whether I was happy now, and when I said no, she did not believe me. The arrest became public by evening because someone posted a video. The caption described a twin sister revenge scandal and focused on the baby shower because people understand balloons better than bank fraud. News sites repeated the family details, while strangers argued over whether I was brave, cruel, jealous, or unstable. The actual case moved slower, and Elise was released pending trial because she was pregnant, had no violent record, and surrendered her passport. She was ordered not to contact me or access accounts connected to my identity. Daniel moved out of their house within a week and filed for annulment based on fraud, though the lawyers later changed the strategy to divorce because annulment standards were complicated. The medical office property was frozen. The bank restored the stolen funds to the estate after months of review, then pursued Daniel's company and title insurer. Daniel claimed he believed the money belonged to Elise and produced messages where she said our father had privately promised her the commercial building and cash. His claim of ignorance helped him avoid criminal charges, but it did not save the property deal or his reputation. Marcus's wife filed for divorce. As for the baby, paternity testing could not happen through gossip or angry relatives. Daniel requested a legal test after birth. Marcus agreed through his attorney. Elise resisted, saying stress and invasive demands endangered the pregnancy, but eventually the family court entered an order. Until then, everyone waited, while Elise accepted a plea agreement before trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecutor offered reduced exposure because she was pregnant and had no prior convictions, which made me angry until Miriam reminded me that prior crimes nobody reported do not count as prior convictions. She pleaded guilty to identity theft, forgery, and financial fraud. She received home confinement, followed by probation, restitution, and a permanent record that made it impossible to keep pretending our conflict was only sibling jealousy. The judge also ordered her to stop using any variation of my name on financial or legal documents. Hearing a judge tell my twin sister she could not use my identity felt absurd and necessary, and the baby was born 6 weeks early, but healthy enough to leave the hospital after a short stay. Elise named him Oliver, a name our father once mentioned for a son he never had. The paternity test showed that Marcus was the biological father, after which Daniel never visited again. Marcus did, though his involvement remained limited because his own marriage was collapsing and his lawyer advised caution. He paid support and eventually sought a formal parenting schedule. Elise accused him of abandoning her, then accused Daniel of abandoning a child he had planned to raise, even though she had built the entire situation on secrets. I saw Oliver for the first time when he was 8 months old after our cousin arranged it at our aunt's house because Elise wanted family photographs for a custody hearing and apparently believed including me would show stability. I almost refused, but the child had done nothing wrong. He had dark hair, serious eyes, and none of the strange symbolic features people search for in babies because he simply looked like himself. Elise watched me hold him and said I had taken everything else, so I should at least leave her son alone. I handed him back and said the police, bank, court, Daniel, and Marcus had all made their own decisions. She said I had started it. That was true in the narrowest possible way. I had reported the crime. I had attended the shower. I had refused to disappear. What happened after belonged to the structure she had built. The inheritance case ended almost 2 years after our father's death. I kept the commercial property as the will required. The estate recovered most of the stolen money, though fees consumed more than anyone likes to admit. Daniel's company dissolved. The medical office building was sold to repay the bank and estate. Daniel later wrote to me and said Elise had manipulated both of us and suggested we meet because nobody else understood what it meant to be deceived by her. I read the message twice, then deleted it. He had chosen to believe the version of Elise that benefited him. He had enjoyed telling me I was paranoid, married her quickly, and accepted money without asking enough questions. Her lies did not erase his choices. Marcus never contacted me directly again. I heard he eventually rebuilt a relationship with his children from his marriage, and maintained supervised visits with Oliver until the court expanded them. I do not know whether he became a better man. I only know he stopped protecting Elise when protection became more expensive than truth. Elise and I do not have a relationship now, although relatives still ask whether I can forgive her, because identical twins are supposed to share some bond deeper than ordinary siblings. I tell them sharing a face did not make her entitled to my name. She sends letters twice a year. Some are apologies. Others accuse me of enjoying her humiliation. Both can appear in the same envelope. The most honest letter said she had spent her whole life believing I received the better version of everything. Better grades, more trust from our father, Daniel's first commitment, the commercial property, and the reputation of being reliable. She wrote that using my identity began as borrowing what life had already given me twice. That sentence explained her without excusing her because our father did favor reliability, but reliability was not a gift placed in my crib. It was what remained after years of cleaning up damage she left behind. She saw the result and ignored the cost. I sometimes think about the baby shower and wonder whether arriving with police was necessary. The officers could have arrested her outside. I could have avoided the audience. Marcus might have told Daniel privately instead of walking into a decorated room full of relatives. A quieter version would have been kinder to Oliver's future story. It also would have allowed Elise to tell everyone I had ambushed her in secret, twisted documents, and destroyed a happy family out of jealousy. Public truth became protection because private truth had failed for decades. That does not mean I am proud of every second, because I remember the tiny shoes beneath the welcome sign, Daniel sitting with messages in his hand, and Elise being led away while one palm covered her stomach. I remember wanting her exposed, then feeling sick when exposure finally arrived. Revenge is simple in titles and complicated in rooms, and although I recovered my name, my inheritance, and the property my father intended me to have, but I did not recover the years spent checking credit reports, defending myself to relatives, and wondering whether every unfamiliar account carried my signature. I also did not recover Daniel, which turned out to be a mercy rather than a loss. At 48, I finally understand that people can steal only what systems allow them to reach, and family pressure had been the system protecting Elise more effectively than any forged document. Every time I stayed quiet to save her future, I gave her access to mine. The police at the baby shower were not the beginning of the destruction. They were simply the first witnesses my family could not talk me into ignoring. My sister stole my identity, married my ex, and took my inheritance because she believed being my twin meant she could always step into my place and call the damage confusion. She forgot that even identical faces leave different fingerprints. And when the truth finally entered the room, it did not stop with me, because the husband she stole learned the baby was not his. The man who helped her lost his own family. And the child at the center of it all began life surrounded by adults, paying for secrets he never created. I wish I could end by saying justice felt clean, but it did not, because it felt like standing beside an untouched cake while police lights flashed through country club windows, knowing I had finally stopped my sister, and also knowing that stopping her would become part of a child's family history forever. I believe I did the right thing, although I no longer believe the right thing always feels good.